It is January 16th, 1893. And the sky above Honolulu is not just dark. It is heavy. Heavy the way the sky gets before something irreversible happens. The kind of darkness that presses down on a city like a hand over a mouth. The kind of silence that falls when the last door has been locked and the last prayer has been whispered, and there is nothing left to do but wait for the men with the guns to arrive. The trade winds have stopped. That almost never happens in Hawaii. The air hangs motionless over the harbor like the whole Pacific Ocean is holding its breath. And if you were standing on the waterfront tonight, if you were one of the dockworkers or fishermen who know this harbor the way they know their own hands, you would see something that does not belong. Something that has never belonged. The steel gray hull of the USS Boston, an American warship, sitting in the harbor of a nation it was never invited to enter, its guns loaded, its decks lit, its Marines awake and dressed and armed and waiting for an order. Not an order from the president, not an order from Congress, not an order from any elected official in the United States of America. An order from businessmen, sugar merchants, plantation owners, men who grew cane on land they did not own, in a country they did not build, among a people they did not respect. Men who sat in a private office 2 miles from this harbor and decided, with the casual confidence of someone signing a business contract, that an entire nation needed to disappear, not conquered, not defeated in battle, not overwhelmed by a superior civilization, purchased, liquidated, foreclosed upon, like a house, like a piece of property, like an asset on a spreadsheet that was no longer performing well enough to justify its independence. Inside Ailani Palace, a palace, let that word settle into your mind, a palace with electricity before the White House had electricity, a palace with a telephone before most of Europe had telephones. Queen Liliʻuokalani sits in a room where the lamps are still burning. She has not slept. She has been writing letters. Letters to diplomats. Letters to foreign governments. Letters to the American president. Letters to God, perhaps. Letters to anyone who might still believe that the word sovereignty means something. That the word treaty means something. That when the United States of America signs an agreement recognizing your nation as an independent country, that recognition is not a temporary convenience to be revoked the moment your sugar becomes too expensive. She still believes in law. She still believes in civilization. She still believes that a kingdom recognized by every major power on earth, by the United States, by Great Britain, by France, by Japan, by the German Empire, cannot simply be erased by a committee of businessmen with a financial grievance. She is about to learn the most devastating lesson in the history of the Pacific. She is wrong. By sunrise, armed men will march to the steps of her government building. They will read a document she has never seen. They will announce that the Kingdom of Hawaii, a kingdom older than the state of Texas, older than the state of California, older than the Confederacy that America fought a civil war to destroy, no longer exists. They will call themselves the Committee of Safety. They will use the word liberty. They will use the word democracy. They will use the word order. And they will mean none of these things. They will mean sugar. They will mean profit. They will mean that the numbers on their ledgers matter more than the lives of a people who have called these islands home for 1,000 years, and behind them, silent, expressionless, their bayonets catching the first light of a Hawaiian morning, will stand 162 United States Marines, deployed on foreign soil, without a declaration of war, without a treaty violation, without a single act of Hawaiian aggression. They are there because sugar is profitable, and the Queen threatened the profits. And in the arithmetic of empire, that is reason enough to kill a country. Let me say that again, because the world has spent 130 years trying to make you forget it. They killed a country over sugar, not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. They took a sovereign nation, a nation with a flag, a constitution, embassies in foreign capitals, and treaties signed in ink that has still not faded, and they killed it. They strangled it in its own palace. They wrapped it in the American flag and told the world it had volunteered. This is not a story about culture. This is not a story about destiny. This is not a story about the strong consuming the weak because nature demands it and progress requires it and history forgives it. Those are the lies. Those are the beautiful, comfortable, sun-drenched lies that were printed in your school books and repeated by your tour guides and played on ukuleles in hotel lobbies across Waikiki, while the descendants of the people who were robbed served cocktails to the descendants of the people who robbed them. This is a story about a transaction, a deal. A balance sheet, a cold, mechanical, perfectly legal crime committed by men in suits who went to church on Sunday and stole a nation on Monday and named a fruit company after themselves on Tuesday. This is the story of how money bought Hawaii. And if you think it cannot happen again, if you think nations cannot be purchased, sovereignty cannot be liquidated, entire peoples cannot be erased by men with briefcases and banking connections, then you have not been paying attention. Because it is happening right now, somewhere in the world, to someone, and the playbook has not changed. Now, stop. Before we go any further, I need you to forget everything you think you know. Forget the postcards, forget the luau's, forget the grass skirts and the surfboards and the Aloha Spirit merchandise at the Honolulu airport. Forget the version of Hawaii that exists in the American imagination, the tropical paradise, the vacation destination, the place you go to escape the real world. Because that Hawaii, the Hawaii of tourism brochures and Hollywood movies and retirement fantasies, is a fiction. It is a costume draped over a corpse. It is the smile painted on the face of a nation that was murdered in its sleep. The real Hawaii, the Hawaii that existed before the businessmen came, before the missionaries came, before the sugar came, was something the modern world has been trained to neither see nor understand. And you need to understand it. Because if you do not understand what existed, you cannot understand what was destroyed. And if you cannot understand what was destroyed, then the men who destroyed it win twice. Once when they took it, and again when they convinced you it was never worth taking. So let me tell you what existed. The Kingdom of Hawaii by the middle of the 19th century was not a collection of grass huts awaiting salvation. It was not a primitive society in need of Western guidance. It was not a blank page upon which American civilization would graciously inscribe the gift of progress. That narrative, that deeply, deliberately, strategically constructed narrative, is the mythology of the thief, and it has been repeated so relentlessly, so confidently, for so long that most people alive today accept it the way they accept the sunrise. Without question, without thought, without ever once asking, who told me this and why? Let me tell you why. Because the truth makes the crime impossible to justify. The Kingdom of Hawaii was one of the most internationally recognized sovereign states in the Pacific. It was not a tribe. It was not a chiefdom. It was a constitutional monarchy with a functioning government, a legislature, a judiciary, a civil service, a postal system, a standing military and diplomatic relations with every major power on earth. It signed treaties. It maintained embassies. Its monarchs did not sit in isolation on a remote island waiting to be discovered. They traveled the world. King Kalakaua, Liliʻuokalani's brother, her predecessor on the throne, circumnavigated the globe in 1881. He was the first reigning monarch of any nation in the history of the world to do so. He met with the Emperor of Japan. He dined with the King of Siam. He was received at the court of Queen Victoria. He visited the Pope. He toured the pyramids. He was received not as a curiosity, not as a specimen of primitive kingship to be observed and patronized, but as a head of state. Because that is what he was. His kingdom was real. His sovereignty was real. His people were real. And here is the detail that should make you stop and reconsider everything you were taught. Hawaiian literacy rates, in their own language, exceeded those of the United States. Let that sink in. The people who were about to be colonized in the name of civilization were more literate than the people who colonized. The Hawaiian Kingdom had its own newspapers, published in Hawaiian, read by a population that was overwhelmingly literate. It had a robust intellectual culture. It had a legal tradition. It had a sophisticated system of land management and resource stewardship that had sustained a thriving population for centuries before the first European sail appeared on the horizon. And Ailani Palace, the palace where Liliʻuokalani sat on the night before her kingdom was stolen, had electric lights. The White House did not. Ailani Palace was wired for electricity in 1887. The White House received electric lighting in 1891. The seat of the Hawaiian government had modern technology before the seat of the American government. This fact is small. It is trivial in the grand scheme of geopolitics. But it matters. It matters because the entire justification for what happened to Hawaii, the entire moral architecture that supported the overthrow, the annexation, the 60 years of colonial governance, rested on the assumption that Hawaii was backward, that it was waiting, that it needed what America had to offer. Hawaii did not need what America had to offer. America needed what Hawaii had: sugar, land, a harbor, and everything that followed was a plan to take those things while pretending to give something in return. They came first as missionaries. Let me say that again because the sentence contains the entire history of colonialism in 11 words. They came first as missionaries. They arrived in the 1820s from New England, from Massachusetts, from Connecticut. Stern, God-fearing Calvinist families sent by the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions. They came to save souls. They came to bring the light of Christian civilization to what they described, in their letters and journals, as a people living in spiritual darkness. Many of them were sincere. Their sincerity is not in question. Their faith was real. Their sacrifice was real. They left comfortable lives in New England to travel thousands of miles across the Pacific to a place they had never seen, among a people whose language they did not speak, to do what they genuinely believed was God's work. I do not doubt their faith. I doubt their children. Because within one single generation, the missionary families stopped saving souls and started acquiring land. The transition was seamless. It was almost elegant in its efficiency. The parents came with Bibles. The children came with ledgers. The grandchildren came with lawyers. The Thustons, the Castles, the Cooks, the Alexanders, the Baldwins, the Judds, the Doles. These names mean nothing to most of you. In Hawaii, they mean everything. They are carved into buildings. They are printed on street signs. They are stamped on the products you buy at the grocery store. They are the names of the families who took Hawaii, not in a single dramatic act of conquest, but slowly, patiently, generation by generation, acre by acre, law by law, until they owned the land, controlled the economy, dominated the government, and held the very survival of the Hawaiian nation in their hands. And at the center of their power, at the beating heart of the machine they built, was one single, devastating commodity. Sugarcane had been present in Hawaii for centuries. The Hawaiians grew it. They chewed it. It was part of the landscape. But the missionary children saw something the Hawaiians never intended: industrial potential. They saw the volcanic soil, rich and deep. They saw the tropical sun, relentless and perfect. They saw the water, streams cascading down mountain slopes that could be diverted, channeled, controlled. They saw, in short, a factory, an outdoor, year-round, sun-powered factory for producing the most profitable commodity in the 19th century global economy. And they began to build. The plantations spread across the islands like a slow infection. Maui, Kauai, the Big Island, vast tracts of land that had been held communally by the Hawaiian people under a traditional system of stewardship called the ahupua, were converted into private property, bought for pennies, leased for decades, or simply taken through legal mechanisms that the Hawaiian people did not fully understand, because the concept of private land ownership was not native to their culture. The missionaries introduced it. The plantation owners exploited it. Think about that. The people who taught the Hawaiians about private property were the same people who used that knowledge to take their land. The teachers became the thieves. The lesson was the weapon. Within decades, the majority of arable land in the Hawaiian Islands was owned not by Hawaiians, but by the descendants of the men who had come to teach them about Jesus Christ. This was not a side effect. This was not an unintended consequence. This was the business plan. And the business needed one thing to survive. One thing that the plantation owners could not produce themselves, no matter how much land they owned, no matter how much sugar they grew, no matter how efficient their operations became. Access. Access to the American market. Without it, Hawaiian sugar was just sugar, competing on the open global market against Cuba, against Brazil, against the Philippines, against every other tropical producer in the world. With it, with duty-free access to the largest consumer economy on Earth, Hawaiian sugar was gold. And in 1875, the plantation owners got what they wanted. The Reciprocity Treaty of 1875. Remember this name. Write it down. Tattoo it on the inside of your eyelids. Because this treaty, this single document, this one agreement between the Kingdom of Hawaii and the United States of America, is the lock that was placed around Hawaii's throat. Everything that followed, the Bayonet Constitution, the overthrow, the annexation, the territorial subjugation, the statehood without sovereignty, all of it traces back to this piece of paper. The terms were simple. Hawaiian sugar could enter the United States duty-free. No tariffs, no import taxes, a direct pipeline from the cane fields of Maui to the sugar bowls of San Francisco. In exchange, Hawaii agreed to one condition. It would not lease or cede any port, harbor, or territory to any other foreign power. Not to Britain, not to France, not to Japan, not to anyone. On the surface, it was a trade deal, a mutually beneficial arrangement between a small Pacific kingdom and a large continental power. Sugar for security, commerce for exclusivity. In reality, it was a leash. Here is what the Reciprocity Treaty actually did. It made the entire Hawaiian economy dependent on a single market. Before the treaty, Hawaii traded with everyone, with Britain, with France, with China, with the Pacific world. After the treaty, it traded with America. Only America, because the duty-free access made American trade so profitable that every other trading relationship withered. Why sell sugar to Britain at world market prices when you could sell it to America tax-free? Why diversify your economy when one crop, sold to one customer, made you richer than God? The sugar barons didn't ask these questions. They were too busy counting money. But here is the question they should have asked. The question that, had they been less greedy and more wise, might have saved a kingdom. What happens when the customer changes the terms? Because the customer always changes the terms. That is the fundamental law of economic dependence. When your survival depends on someone else's goodwill, you do not have a partnership. You have a hostage situation, and the hostage does not get to negotiate. The Reciprocity Treaty made the Hawaiian Kingdom a hostage. It made the plantation owners rich, yes, unimaginably, obscenely, grotesquely rich. Their mansions rose above Honolulu like temples to sugar. Their children attended the finest schools in America. Their names appeared on the boards of banks, insurance companies, shipping lines. They lived like kings in a kingdom that was not theirs. But their wealth, their entire world, depended on a single clause in a single treaty maintained by a single foreign government. And that government had no loyalty to Hawaii, no affection for its people, no obligation to maintain the arrangement 1 second longer than it served American interests. Hawaii had been given a gift, and in the arithmetic of empire, gifts are never free. They are investments, they are down payments, they are the sugar on the rim of the glass that makes you drink the poison without tasting it. The first crack appeared in 1887. King Kalakaua, the world-traveling, culturally ambitious, politically assertive monarch, had begun to behave in a way that made the sugar barons very uncomfortable. He was behaving like a king. He was spending money on Hawaiian cultural revival. He was entertaining diplomatic overtures from Japan. He was exploring the idea of a Polynesian confederation, a union of Pacific Island nations that would strengthen Hawaiian sovereignty and reduce American influence. He was appointing cabinet ministers who were loyal to the Hawaiian people rather than to the plantation interests. He was, in other words, governing. And that was intolerable, because the sugar barons had not spent 30 years building an economic empire to watch a Hawaiian king exercise actual power over it. They had not accumulated land, wealth, and influence to be subject to the whims of a sovereign whose interests were not aligned with their profit margins. They needed control, not influence, not access, not a seat at the table, control. And so they took it. In June of 1887, a group of approximately 400 armed men, members of a secret organization called the Hawaiian League, made up almost entirely of white businessmen and their supporters, marched on the palace. They did not fire a shot. They did not need to. They brought with them a document, a new constitution, and they presented it to King Kalakaua with an ultimatum that left no room for negotiation. Sign it or we will remove you. Sign it or we will end you. Sign it or the armed men standing behind us will do what armed men do when they are told that a king is no longer useful. Kalakaua signed. The document became known as the Bayonet Constitution. Say that name out loud. The Bayonet Constitution. Not the Constitutional Convention. Not the Reform Act. Not the Democratic Transition. The Bayonet Constitution. Because even the name tells you the truth. It was imposed at the point of a weapon. It was not drafted by the people of Hawaii. It was not debated by the Hawaiian legislature. It was not approved by Hawaiian voters. It was written by lawyers employed by sugar companies and delivered by armed men to a captive king. And here is what it did. It stripped the monarchy of most executive power. It transferred authority to a cabinet and legislature that the planter class controlled. It imposed property qualifications for voting, qualifications designed with surgical precision to disenfranchise native Hawaiians who did not own property under the Western system, while enfranchising wealthy white residents who were not even citizens of the kingdom. It gave the vote to foreign nationals based on wealth while taking it from native Hawaiians based on poverty. Read that again. Foreign citizens could vote in Hawaiian elections if they were rich enough. Native Hawaiians could not vote in their own elections if they were too poor. This is what the sugar barons called reform. This is what they called progress. This is what they called democracy. And buried deep within this constitution, almost as an afterthought, almost as a footnote, except that it was not an afterthought and it was not a footnote, and the men who wrote it knew exactly what they were doing, was a provision granting the United States exclusive access to Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor, a natural deep-water harbor on the southern coast of Oahu, sacred in Hawaiian tradition, strategically invaluable in Western military doctrine, and now, as of 1887, ceded to the United States, not through negotiation, not through purchase, not through treaty, but as a clause in a constitution that was imposed on a captive king by armed businessmen while American warships sat in the harbor and American diplomats looked the other way. Pearl Harbor was not given. It was extracted, like a tooth, like a mineral, like a resource from a colony that does not yet know it is a colony. And then, as if the universe itself were conspiring to complete the tragedy, King Kalakaua died. He died in San Francisco in January of 1891, away from his kingdom, away from his people, in a hotel room in a country that was already planning to consume his nation. He was 54 years old. He had been king for 17 years. He had been a prisoner of the Bayonet Constitution for 4. He died knowing that his kingdom was slipping away and that he had not been strong enough to hold it. His sister succeeded him, Queen Liliʻuokalani. She took the throne knowing exactly what she was inheriting. Not a kingdom, a cage. A beautiful ceremonial cage with a crown on top and sugar on the walls and an American warship in the harbor. She took the throne knowing that the Constitution she was sworn to uphold had been imposed at gunpoint. She took the throne knowing that the men who controlled her economy wanted to control her government. She took the throne knowing that the most powerful nation on earth was watching her islands with the patient, calculating gaze of a predator that has already decided to eat but has not yet decided when. She took the throne anyway, and she decided to fight, not with armies, not with weapons, not with violence. She decided to fight with law, with governance, with the very constitutional mechanisms that the Americans claimed to revere. She decided to give her people back their vote. She decided to write a new constitution, one that would undo the Bayonet Constitution, restore the powers of the monarchy, re-enfranchise native Hawaiian voters, and return to the Hawaiian people some measure of control over their own country. It was the most reasonable, most democratic, most legally defensible thing she could have done. It was also the most dangerous. And then, in 1890, the United States Congress detonated the bomb, the McKinley Tariff. You need to understand what this law did, because without it, there is no overthrow. Without it, there is no annexation. Without it, Hawaii might still be an independent nation today. The McKinley Tariff is the trigger. It is the match that was dropped into a room that the sugar barons had spent decades filling with kerosene. The McKinley Tariff did not raise duties on Hawaiian sugar. It did something infinitely worse. It eliminated tariffs on all foreign sugar, all of it, from every country, and provided a bounty of 2 cents per pound to domestic American sugar producers, a direct subsidy. A cash payment from the United States government to American sugar growers for every pound of sugar they produced. In one stroke, one vote, one signature, one law, the entire competitive advantage of Hawaiian sugar evaporated. The duty-free access that the Reciprocity Treaty had provided was meaningless now. Everyone had duty-free access, and American domestic producers had something Hawaiian planters could never have, a 2-cent government subsidy. Hawaiian sugar went from being the most competitive product on the American market to being one of the least competitive. Overnight, the value of Hawaiian sugar exports collapsed. Plantation revenues plummeted. Land values cratered. Fortunes that had taken decades to build began to dissolve in months. The sugar barons panicked, and in their panic, they made a calculation. A cold, precise mathematical calculation that would determine the fate of a nation. If Hawaii remained an independent country, Hawaiian sugar would always be foreign sugar, subject to the whims of Congress, vulnerable to tariff changes, at the mercy of American politics. But if Hawaii became part of the United States, if it ceased to be a foreign nation and became an American territory, then Hawaiian sugar would be domestic sugar. It would qualify for the bounty. It would be protected forever. The solution was not economic reform. The solution was not diversification. The solution was not competition. The solution was annexation. Dissolve the nation, absorb the territory, convert the kingdom into a county, and the tariff problem disappears because there is no tariff between American states. There is no border. There is no foreign. There is only us. Annexation was not a political vision. It was an accounting strategy. It was a line item on a profit and loss statement. The sovereign kingdom of Hawaii, with its constitution, its flag, its queen, its 1,000-year history, was an obstacle to a 2-cent bounty on sugar. And obstacles in the world these men inhabited were removed. January 14, 1893, Queen Liliʻuokalani announces her intention to promulgate a new constitution. She has been working on it for months, in consultation with her advisors, her cabinet, and her people. The new constitution will restore the powers of the monarchy. It will re-enfranchise native Hawaiian voters. It will strip the property qualifications that have disenfranchised the majority of the Hawaiian population. It will, in essence, undo the Bayonet Constitution and return to the Hawaiian people the democratic rights that were taken from them at gunpoint 6 years earlier. She is doing something radical, something dangerous, something that will get her overthrown. She is trying to give her people a vote. Let the irony of that sentence burn through you. A queen trying to give her people a vote will be overthrown by men who claim to believe in democracy. A monarch trying to restore democratic rights to a disenfranchised population will be deposed by businessmen who disenfranchised that population in the first place. A woman trying to use the legal system to correct an injustice will be removed by men who committed the injustice and now call her correction a crime. This is not irony. This is architecture. This is the deliberate, calculated construction of a narrative in which the victim is made to look like the aggressor and the aggressor is made to look like the savior. This is the template. This is the playbook. And it has been used so many times in so many countries on so many continents that you can set your watch by it. Step 1. Take power illegally. Step 2. Write laws that protect your power. Step 3. When the legitimate government tries to restore the old laws, call it a revolution. Step 4. Overthrow the legitimate government to protect the laws you imposed. Step 5. Call it democracy. The sugar barons followed this playbook to the letter. Within hours of Liliʻuokalani's announcement, the Committee of Safety was convened. 13 men, mostly American citizens or the sons of American citizens, mostly connected to the sugar industry, mostly members of the same social clubs, the same churches, the same businesses. Lauren Thurston, grandson of Missionaries, lawyer, publisher, the architect of the Overthrow, a man who had been planning this moment for years, who had traveled to Washington to secure American support, who had corresponded with American officials, who had mapped out every step of the operation with the methodical precision of a man planning a corporate acquisition. Because that is what this was, a corporate acquisition, the hostile takeover of a sovereign nation by a consortium of private interests. Sanford Dole, a name you know, a name you see on cans of pineapple at the supermarket, a name that has been so thoroughly absorbed into the consumer landscape of American life that it carries no weight, no history, no blood. Just pineapple, just fruit, just a brand. But Sanford Dole was not a brand. He was the man who would serve as the first president of the Republic of Hawaii, a republic that no Hawaiian asked for, that no Hawaiian voted for, that existed for one purpose and one purpose only, to serve as a holding company for Hawaiian sovereignty until the annexation paperwork could be completed. And behind them, enabling everything, facilitating everything, guaranteeing everything, John L. Stevens, the United States Minister to Hawaii, the American ambassador, the man whose job, whose explicit constitutional legal job, was to represent the interests of the United States government in its diplomatic relations with a sovereign foreign nation. Stevens did not represent the interests of the United States government. He represented the interests of the Committee of Safety. He had been in communication with Thurston and the annexationists for months, possibly years. He had written to the State Department recommending annexation. He had assured the committee that American military support would be available when the time came. And when the time came, he delivered. January 16, 1893, Stevens orders 162 Marines and sailors from the USS Boston to come ashore. They marched through the streets of Honolulu, the capital of a sovereign foreign nation, in full combat gear, with rifles and artillery. They take up positions near the government buildings, near the palace, near the centers of Hawaiian power. They do not come as peacekeepers. They do not come as neutrals. They do not come as the representatives of a government that has been asked to intervene. They come as the armed guarantee behind a business deal. Their guns are the signature on the contract. Their presence is the threat that makes resistance impossible. And here is the detail that should make your blood cold. The Marines were deployed before the overthrow began, not during. Not after. Before. They were in position before the Committee of Safety made its move. They were standing in the streets of Honolulu, armed and ready, while the Queen was still in her palace, still governing, still sovereign. The United States military was deployed on the soil of a friendly foreign nation to support a coup that had not yet happened. This was not a spontaneous intervention. This was not a response to a crisis. This was a prearranged military operation in support of a privately organized overthrow of a sovereign government. And Liliʻuokalani knew it. She stood in her palace, looked out at the Marines in her streets, and understood, with the devastating clarity that comes only to those who have been completely betrayed, that she had no options. She could resist and her people would die. American rifles against Hawaiian bodies. The mathematics of that equation are simple and absolute, where she could yield, temporarily, under protest, and appeal to the conscience of the American government to undo what its agents had done. She chose to yield. She chose to believe that America was better than this, that the nation founded on the principle that all men are created equal would not stand by while a handful of sugar merchants destroyed a sovereign kingdom for profit. She chose to believe in the very ideals that America claimed to represent. On January 17, 1893, Queen Liliʻuokalani issued her statement, and it is one of the most important documents ever written by a human being facing the destruction of everything she loved. I need you to hear these words, not skim them, not skip past them. Hear them. She wrote, I, Liliʻuokalani, by the grace of God and under the Constitution of the Hawaiian Kingdom, Queen, do hereby solemnly protest against any and all acts done against myself and the constitutional government of the Hawaiian Kingdom by certain persons claiming to have established a provisional government of and for this kingdom. That I yield to the superior force of the United States of America, whose Minister Plenipotentiary, His Excellency John L. Stevens, has caused United States troops to be landed at Honolulu and declared that he would support the said provisional government. Now, to avoid any collision of armed forces and perhaps the loss of life, I do, under this protest and impelled by said force, yield my authority until such time as the government of the United States shall, upon the facts being presented to it, undo the action of its representative and reinstate me in the authority which I claim as the constitutional sovereign of the Hawaiian Islands. Read that last line again. Until such time as the government of the United States shall, upon the facts being presented to it, undo the action of its representative and reinstate me. She did not abdicate. She did not surrender. She did not accept the legitimacy of what was being done to her. She placed her crown, her nation, her people, her history, her future, in the hands of American justice. She said, I am giving this to you temporarily, because your guns leave me no choice, but I am trusting you to give it back, because you are America, and America believes in justice. She would wait for the rest of her life. America never gave it back. The provisional government moved with the efficiency of a machine that has been pre-programmed. Within hours of Liliʻuokalani's statement, Sanford Dole was installed as president. Minister Stevens recognized the new government immediately, without consulting Washington, without waiting for authorization, without any legal basis whatsoever. One American diplomat, acting alone on his own authority, recognized a government that had been installed by force on behalf of sugar companies, with the backing of American Marines who had been deployed without a declaration of war. A delegation was dispatched to Washington. Lorrin Thurston led it. They carried a treaty of annexation. They expected President Benjamin Harrison, a Republican and expansionist, a friend of business, to push it through the Senate. And he tried. The treaty was submitted. The machinery of annexation was set in motion. The sugar barons were weeks, perhaps days, from achieving their goal. And then Grover Cleveland won the presidential election. Cleveland was a Democrat. Cleveland was a skeptic. Cleveland was, on this one issue, in this one moment, something dangerously close to a man of principle. He took office in March 1893. He withdrew the annexation treaty. He sent a special investigator, James Blunt, to Hawaii to find out what had actually happened. Blunt spent 4 months in Hawaii. He interviewed witnesses. He reviewed documents. He examined the sequence of events, and his report, the Blunt Report, submitted in July 1893, was devastating. Concluded that the overthrow had been accomplished with the direct participation of the United States military, that Minister Stevens had acted improperly and in collusion with the conspirators, that the provisional government did not represent the will of the Hawaiian people, that the Hawaiian people overwhelmingly opposed the overthrow, that the United States bore direct responsibility for the destruction of the Hawaiian monarchy. Cleveland read the report, and to his credit, to the only credit that can be given in this entire sordid story, he was horrified. He called the overthrow a substantial wrong. He described it as an act of war. He instructed his new minister to Hawaii to inform the provisional government that the United States expected the restoration of the Queen. And here, right here, is the moment where the story reveals its cruelest truth. The provisional government said no. Sanford Dole, Loren Thurston, the men who had used American Marines to seize power, the men who had wrapped themselves in the American flag, the men who had claimed to act in the name of American values. When the President of the United States told them to step down, they refused. They said, "We are the legitimate government of Hawaii. We do not recognize your authority to tell us otherwise." The irony is beyond language. The men who had used American military force to overthrow a Queen now told the American president that he had no right to undo their work. The men who had invoked American power to destroy Hawaiian sovereignty now invoked Hawaiian sovereignty to resist American power. And Cleveland, Grover Cleveland, the man who had called the overthrow an act of war, did nothing. He would not send troops. He would not use force. He would not risk a confrontation. He referred the matter to Congress. Congress debated. Congress investigated. Congress produced a competing report, the Morgan Report, that largely exonerated the annexationists. Congress ran out the clock, and while Congress debated, the provisional government became the Republic of Hawaii. Sanford Dole became its president. Elections were held, elections in which only men who swore a loyalty oath to the Republic could vote. Native Hawaiians, who overwhelmingly opposed the Republic, largely refused to swear the oath. They were therefore excluded from the political process of their own country. Again, this is what the sugar barons called a republic, a government elected by the people who stole the government. They came for the Queen in January of 1895. A small group of Hawaiian loyalists, brave, desperate, doomed, attempted a counter-revolution. They gathered weapons. They planned an uprising. They intended to restore Liliʻuokalani to her throne. They failed. The Republic crushed the uprising in days. The participants were arrested. And then the Republic did something that revealed, with perfect clarity, the nature of the regime that had replaced the monarchy. They arrested Liliʻuokalani, the Queen, the deposed, powerless, already defeated Queen. They arrested her in her own home. They charged her with misprision of treason, knowledge of a treasonous plot. They claimed she had known about the uprising. They did not claim she had planned it, funded it, or participated in it. They claimed she had known about it. A queen who has been deposed, whose kingdom has been stolen, whose people have been disenfranchised, is arrested because she knew that some of her people wanted their country back. The crime was knowledge. The crime was awareness. The crime was being a Hawaiian who understood that what had been done to Hawaii was wrong. They tried her before a military tribunal, in her own palace, in the room where she had once governed. They sat in judgment of her in the seat of her own power and told her she was a criminal. She was convicted. She was sentenced to 5 years of hard labor. The sentence was commuted to house arrest. But there was a condition. There is always a condition. She was required, as the price of her reduced sentence, to sign a formal document of abdication, to put her name, the name of the last Queen of Hawaii, on a piece of paper that said her kingdom was over. She signed it, in prison, under duress, as a captive, and she signed it Liliʻuokalani Dominus, her married name, not her royal name, a small act of defiance, a final protest written in the space between two names. She was telling them, the Queen did not sign this. The Queen will never sign this. You have a piece of paper with a married woman's name on it. You do not have the Queen's consent. You will never have the Queen's consent. You have her signature. You do not have her soul. The Republic of Hawaii existed for 4 years. It existed to wait, like a holding company, like a shell corporation, like a legal fiction designed to maintain the appearance of governance while the real business, the transfer of sovereignty, was negotiated in offices in Washington, D.C. They waited for Cleveland to leave. They waited for a new president. They waited for a man who would finish the transaction. William McKinley, Republican, expansionist, friend of business. He took office in 1897. A new annexation treaty was submitted to the Senate. But even McKinley could not force it through the constitutional process. The treaty required a two-thirds vote. The votes were not there. Opposition was real. Some senators recognized the overthrow for what it was. Some feared the precedent. Some simply did not want to absorb a Pacific territory with a non-white majority. And then there was the petition. 21,000 signatures. Let that number breathe. In 1897, the Hawaiian Patriotic League, Hui Aloha Ina, organized the largest petition drive in Hawaiian history. They went door to door across every island. They spoke to every native Hawaiian they could reach. They explained what annexation would mean, and they asked for signatures. 21,000 Hawaiians signed their names to a document that said, "We do not consent. We do not wish to become Americans. We do not accept the dissolution of our nation. We want our kingdom back." 21,000 names, from a native population of approximately 40,000. More than half of every native Hawaiian alive signed their name against annexation. The petitions were sent to Washington. They were delivered to the Senate. They were entered into the congressional record. They were ignored. 21,000 voices, silenced by a filing cabinet. Because in April 1898, the Spanish-American War began. And suddenly, Hawaii was no longer a moral question. It was a military question. Its harbors were needed. Its position in the Pacific was needed. Pearl Harbor, the harbor that had been extracted from a captive king under the Bayonet Constitution, was needed for the projection of American naval power across the Pacific. The strategic argument overwhelmed the moral argument. It always does. When nations want something badly enough, morality becomes a luxury they can no longer afford. And the annexationists found their vehicle. Not a treaty, they still could not get two-thirds of the Senate. Instead, they used a joint resolution, the Newlands Resolution, a simple majority vote, an internal legislative act used to absorb a foreign nation. Think about what that means. Think about the legal absurdity of it. A joint resolution is a domestic law. It binds American citizens. It cannot bind foreign nations. You cannot annex a sovereign country through a joint resolution any more than you can buy someone's house by writing yourself a receipt. The legal mechanism was illegitimate. The constitutional basis was non-existent. But the votes were there, and that was all that mattered. On July 7, 1898, President McKinley signed the Newlands Resolution. On August 12, 1898, in a ceremony at Iolani Palace, the Hawaiian flag was lowered for the last time. I need you to see this moment. I need you to stand in that crowd and feel it. The flag comes down. The Hawaiian flag. The flag that had flown over these islands for decades. The flag of a nation that had been recognized by every major power on earth. The flag that Liliʻuokalani had pledged to defend. The flag that 21,000 people had signed a petition to save. Comes down slowly. The wind has returned. Catches the fabric as it descends. And then it is gone. Folded. Put away. Museum piece, artifact, souvenir, and the American flag goes up. The Royal Hawaiian Band, the Queen's Band, the Kingdom's Band, the band that had played at state functions and diplomatic receptions and national celebrations for years, had been ordered to perform at the ceremony. Every single native Hawaiian member refused. Every one. They put down their instruments. They took off their uniforms. They walked away. They would not play the music for the death of their nation. They would not provide the soundtrack for the crime. A military band from an American warship played instead. American music for an American ceremony on Hawaiian land, without Hawaiian consent, without Hawaiian participation, without a single Hawaiian voice. The Hawaiian people stayed home. They closed their windows. They drew their curtains. They draped their houses in black, the color of mourning. They wept. They held each other. They prayed. And they refused to watch. They refused to be the audience at their own funeral. Now let me tell you what was taken. Not in abstract terms. Not in the language of political science. In concrete, physical, measurable terms that cannot be denied, cannot be euphemized, cannot be folded into the language of progress and partnership and mutual benefit. The land was taken. The Crown lands 1.8 million acres, nearly half of the total land area of the Hawaiian Islands, the most fertile soil, the most valuable coastline, the most strategically significant harbors, transferred to the United States government upon annexation. Not purchased, not negotiated, not compensation for services rendered, transferred, like an asset in a bankruptcy proceeding, like inventory in a liquidation sale. The Hawaiian people received nothing, no payment, no royalties, no equity, nothing. Imagine that someone took your house, not bought it, took it. Imagine they moved in, changed the locks, put their name on the deed, and then told you that you could stay in the guest room if you behaved. That is what happened to the Hawaiian people. Except it was not a house. It was a country. Pearl Harbor was taken. The harbor that was extracted under the Bayonet Constitution, formalized under annexation, and expanded into the most powerful naval installation in the Pacific Ocean. Today, Pearl Harbor is the headquarters of the United States Indo-Pacific Command. It is the reason the United States is a Pacific power. Its strategic value is estimated in the tens of billions of dollars. It was never purchased. It was never negotiated in good faith. It was taken from a captive king by armed businessmen and formalized by an illegal annexation. And the Hawaiian people, whose harbor it was, whose ancestors fished its waters for centuries, became janitors and landscapers at a military base built on their own stolen property. The language was taken. In 1896, 2 years before annexation was even formalized, the Republic of Hawaii banned the Hawaiian language from schools, banned it, made it illegal to teach children in their own language. For 90 years, from 1896 to 1986, Hawaiian was suppressed, marginalized, diminished. A language that had been the medium of a literate, sophisticated culture was reduced to a curiosity, a heritage language, a tourist attraction. Aloha, mahalo, words emptied of meaning and printed on t-shirts. By the mid-20th century, the number of native Hawaiian speakers had dwindled to the thousands. A language that had produced newspapers, constitutions, legal codes, and literature was nearly extinct. Not because it was inadequate, not because it failed to adapt, because it was killed, deliberately, systematically, by men who understood that if you destroy a people's language, you destroy their ability to remember who they were. The story was taken, and this may be the most devastating theft of all, because the narrative of what happened to Hawaii was written by the people who did it. It was written in American school books that described annexation as a natural, inevitable extension of American democracy. It was written in tourist brochures that presented Hawaii as a paradise, a word that erases all history, all suffering, all politics, and replaces them with a sunset and a cocktail. It was written in the very name, the 50th state, as if Hawaii had always been destined to be a state, as if statehood were a promotion rather than the final stage of a hostile takeover. The Hawaiian people lost control of their own history, and when you lose your history, you lose yourself. You become a character in someone else's story, a backdrop, a setting, a beautiful, exotic, welcoming backdrop against which other people's narratives unfold. You become the scenery in the movie of your own destruction. And what of the sugar barons? They won. Completely, absolutely, permanently. The 5 great corporations that descended from the missionary families, the Big Five, dominated the Hawaiian economy for the next 60 years. Castle and Cook, Alexander and Baldwin, C. Brewer and Company, Theo H. Davies and Company, American Factors. These 5 companies controlled virtually everything. Sugar, pineapple, shipping, banking, insurance, real estate, wholesale and retail trade. They were not just businesses. They were the economy. They were the government in every practical sense. The territorial governor was appointed from Washington, but real power lay with the Big Five. And Sanford Dole, the man who served as president of the Puppet Republic and then as the first territorial governor, his family name would become synonymous with Hawaiian agriculture. The Dole Food Company. You have seen it. You have bought it. Cans of pineapple with a bright yellow label. The Dole Plantation on Oahu is a tourist attraction today. Visitors walk through a pineapple garden maze. They buy souvenirs. They take photographs. And nowhere in the brochures, nowhere on the signs, nowhere in the cheerful guided tours, does anyone mention that the man whose name is on the building helped orchestrate the illegal overthrow of a sovereign nation, served as the unelected president of a puppet government, and oversaw the arrest and imprisonment of a queen in her own palace. His name is on the pineapple. The blood washed off a long time ago. And Pearl Harbor? Pearl Harbor became the centerpiece of American military power in the Pacific. On December 7, 1941, it was attacked by the Empire of Japan. an event that drew the United States into World War II. The attack on Pearl Harbor is one of the most commemorated events in American history. It is remembered as a day of infamy. It is remembered as an unprovoked attack on American soil. American soil. The soil was Hawaiian. The harbor was Hawaiian. The kingdom it belonged to was Hawaiian. And the kingdom had been destroyed, deliberately and illegally, 48 years before the first Japanese bomb fell. The American soil that was attacked at Pearl Harbor was American only because it had been stolen. The base that was bombed was a base that should never have existed, on land that should never have been taken, in a harbor that was extracted from a captive king at the point of a bayonet. This is not to diminish the tragedy of Pearl Harbor. The lives lost on December 7, 1941, were real. The suffering was real. The heroism was real. But the narrative of American soil, of unprovoked attack of a nation violated, is built on a foundation that is itself a violation. America claimed that harbor as its own. It built a military base on stolen land. And when that base was attacked, it mourned the violation of its sovereignty, a sovereignty it had acquired by violating someone else's. The irony does not absolve anyone, but it should haunt everyone. Hawaii became a state in 1959. After 60 years of territorial governance, 60 years in which the Hawaiian people had no vote. In Congress, no electoral votes for president, no representation in the body that made the laws governing their lives. They were offered a choice: statehood or continued territorial status. That was the ballot. Those were the options. Statehood, become the 50th star on the flag, gain representation in Congress, become full American citizens. Or continued territorial status, remain a colony in all but name, governed by appointed officials, subject to laws written by people who had never set foot on the islands. Independence was not on the ballot. Let me repeat that because it is the single most important fact about Hawaiian statehood. Independence was not on the ballot. The Hawaiian people were given a choice between two forms of American governance. They were not given a choice about whether they wanted to be governed by America at all. The question of sovereignty, the question that Liliʻuokalani had raised in 1893, the question that 21,000 Hawaiians had answered with a petition in 1897, the question that had been unanswered for 66 years was not asked. The United Nations Charter, which the United States had signed, required that non-self-governing territories be offered the option of independence in any plebiscite on political status. Hawaii was listed as a non-self-governing territory. The plebiscite did not include an independence option. The United States violated its own international commitments to ensure that the Hawaiian people could not choose to be free. Hawaii voted for statehood. Of course it did. The alternative was continued colonization. When your only options are full membership in the empire or subordinate membership in the empire, you choose full membership. That is not consent. That is a hostage negotiating the terms of captivity. In 1993, 100 years after the overthrow, the United States Congress passed the Apology Resolution. Public Law 103-150, signed by President Bill Clinton. It acknowledged that the overthrow of the Kingdom of Hawaii was accomplished with the active participation of agents and citizens of the United States. It acknowledged that the Hawaiian people never directly relinquished their sovereignty. It acknowledged that the suppression of the Hawaiian language and culture had caused suffering. It apologized. The most powerful nation on earth looked back at what it had done to the smallest nation in its path, and it said, "We are sorry." And then it did nothing. No land was returned. No sovereignty was restored. No reparations were paid. No mechanism for self-determination was created. The apology was a word, a gesture, a press release, cost nothing, changed nothing. It was the political equivalent of sending flowers to the family of someone you murdered and expecting gratitude. An apology without restitution is not an apology. It is a confession with no sentence. It is the killer attending the funeral and weeping louder than the family. It is a nation saying, "Yes, we did this. Yes, it was wrong. And no, we will not undo it, because the thing we took is too valuable to give back." Let me tell you who Liliʻuokalani was at the end. She lived for 24 years after the overthrow. She never stopped fighting. She traveled to Washington to lobby for justice. She wrote a memoir, Hawaii's Story by Hawaii's Queen, a document of such controlled fury and devastating dignity that any honest reader must put it down and sit in silence for a long time afterward. She filed legal claims for the Crown lands. Denied. She petitioned Congress. Ignored. She wrote letters to presidents, unanswered. She watched her kingdom become a territory. She watched her palace become a museum. She watched her people become a minority on their own islands. She watched the sugar flow and the profits accumulate and the American flag fly where her flag had flown. And she endured it, not with resignation, but with the kind of patience that belongs only to those who believe that justice delayed is not justice denied, only justice deferred. She was wrong about that too. She died on November 11, 1917. She was 79 years old. She died in Washington Place, the residence where she had been imprisoned after the failed counter-revolution. She died not as a queen regnant but as a private citizen of a territory of the United States of America. She died composing music. She was a musician. She had always been a musician. She composed songs that captured the beauty and sorrow of the islands she loved and lost. And among those songs was one that you know, one that the whole world knows. Aloha Oe, farewell to thee. She wrote it as a love song. It became a funeral hymn. Today you hear it everywhere in Hawaii, in hotel lobbies, in airport terminals, in restaurants where tourists eat pineapple and drink cocktails decorated with tiny umbrellas. It plays on speakers mounted to walls in shopping centers built on land that was stolen from the people whose queen wrote the song. Aloha Oe, farewell to thee. The tourists hum along. They do not know who wrote it. They do not know what it means. They do not know that every note is a cry from a queen who watched her nation die and could do nothing but turn the grief into music and hope, against all evidence, against all experience, against the entire weight of history, that someone someday would hear it and understand. So here is the verdict. Here is the final accounting. Here is the balance sheet of the sugar deal that killed a nation. The sugar barons won their profits. They won their tariff protection. They won their land, their corporations, their dynasties. Their names are on buildings and street signs and consumer products. Their descendants are wealthy. Their crimes are forgotten. The United States won an empire. It won Pearl Harbor. It won strategic dominance of the Pacific Ocean. It won a chain of islands that would serve as the launching pad for American military power across half the globe. It won a 50th state, a star on the flag, a tourist destination, a brand. The Hawaiian people lost everything. They lost their nation. They lost their queen. They lost their constitution. They lost their land. They lost their language. They lost their vote. They lost their history. They lost the right to determine their own future. They lost the right to say no. They lost the right to exist as a sovereign people in a world that claims to believe in sovereignty. And they lost something that cannot be measured in acres or dollars or treaties. They lost the story. The narrative of what happened to them was written by the people who did it. And that narrative, the narrative of progress, of inevitability, of paradise, is still the dominant story. It is the story you were told. It is the story the world believes. But it is not the true story. The true story is simpler and darker and older than any of us. A small group of wealthy men wanted something that belonged to someone else. They took it. They used every tool available, religion, law, economics, military force, diplomacy, language itself, to take it. And when they were done, they told a story about progress and civilization and mutual benefit that was so convincing, so beautifully constructed, so relentlessly repeated, that the world believed it. The victims believed it. The children of the victims believed it. But the truth has a half-life longer than any lie. And the truth about Hawaii is this. A nation was murdered for sugar. Its body was dressed in an American flag and put on display for tourists. And the murderers named a fruit company after themselves and called it Paradise. The state motto of Hawaii, inherited from the Kingdom of Hawaii, kept as a gesture of cultural preservation, printed on government documents and license plates, is this: Ue mau kuieo ka ina ai ka pono. The life of the land is perpetuated in righteousness. King Kamehameha III spoke those words in 1843, after the British briefly seized the Hawaiian Islands and then, recognizing the kingdom's sovereignty, returned them. The British gave Hawaii back. The Americans never did. The life of the land is perpetuated in righteousness. The land is still there. The mountains still rise above Honolulu. The waves still break on the north shore. The trade winds still blow through the valleys where sugarcane once grew, where the profits of empire once accumulated, where a queen once stood and watched her nation disappear. The land endures. The righteousness is still owed. And until it is paid, until the debt is acknowledged not with an apology but with action, not with words but with sovereignty, not with a resolution but with restoration, the story is not over. The Hawaiian flag still exists. It is folded. It is stored. It is waiting. And somewhere, in a classroom, in a community center, in a living room where the Hawaiian language is being spoken again, taught again, lived again, someone is teaching a child the words of the old anthem. The anthem of a nation that was told it no longer existed. The anthem of a people who were told they were Americans now and should be grateful. The child learns the words. The child sings. And the song is not Aloha Oe. The song is not farewell. The song is something older, something deeper, something that does not say goodbye, says we are still here, we remember, and we are not done.